wish to stop.
Denmark's role in the Second World War is usually ignored, mostly because the invasion itself didn't even last an entire day. It wasn't that Denmark couldn't have resisted for, let's say, a week, because they probably coulda, but the consequences, by the German war machine would have been devastating if they did. Today I want to look at Denmark during the Second World War, including what the occupation looked like, since that's usually not brought up. I also want to look at a little bit of what happened with their colonies, like Greenland and the Faroe Islands afterwards. By 1937 Denmark saw German aggression as about possibility and began to build up their army as big as they possibly could. Germany was importing resources and materials from neutral, Norway and Sweden. Both Britain and Germany had interests in controlling the neutral nations. This would determine which side got the most resources. That's Germany decided to strike first with Operation Weserüberg. It was a military plan to conquer both Denmark and Norway. Now, Denmark didn't really have any resources needed for Germany. It was just a good staging ground for the invasion in Norway. By 1940, the Danish army stood at 14,000. After the start of World War II, they were ordered away from the border. This was to prevent Germany from using the excuse of a border skirmish. Didn't stop Hitler, because well, he needed Denmark. On April 9, 1940, at 4:15 a.m., the attack began. German troops crossed the border into Jutland, quickly overwhelming border guards and bicycle troops. In some places, Danish anti-tank gunners briefly held their ground, destroying armored cars before being forced to retreat. At the same time, German Fallschirmjäger paratroopers dropped onto Masned Island, seizing the fortress and the storm bridge. This was the first ever combat parachute operation in history, and it succeeded in minutes. The Luftwaffe struck hard at Aalborg. German troops airlanded and secured the runways. At Verlo, near Copenhagen, bombers destroyed most of Denmark's air force on the ground. Other airfields were captured almost instantly, ensuring total air superiority. At the same time, German warships sailed straight into Copenhagen harbor. Troops disembarked and surrounded the royal palace, while bombers circled overhead, ready to level the city. By sunrise, Denmark was already encircled, trapped by land, sea, and air. Yet Denmark did not fall without resistance. Along the border and in scattered towns, soldiers and border guards fought desperately against the advancing Germans. In Copenhagen, the Royal Guard even exchanged fire with enemy troops outside the King's Palace. These skirmishes were brief, but they showed Denmark's determination to resist, even against impossible odds. By mid-morning, the outcome was clear. German troops occupied the capital, Danish airfields were lost, and bombers circled overhead, threatening to destroy Copenhagen. At just 6 hours after the invasion began, King Christian I X and the government ordered a ceasefire. Denmark had fallen in a single morning. Unlike in many countries, the Danish were allowed to keep government and monarchy were allowed to remain, though under strict German control. But Denmark was officially under German occupation. Germany wanted Denmark to remain peaceful and cooperative because it was useful for transportation and supplies. Christian X became an important symbol of unity for the Danish people during this time. Even though many people tried to continue their normal lives, German soldiers were present in cities like Copenhagen, and censorship and fear slowly increased across the country. As the occupation continued, daily life in Denmark became more difficult. Food, fuel, and other supplies were rationed, and people often faced shortages of basic goods. Newspapers and radio broadcasts were censored by the Germans, limiting what people could say or hear about the war. Although the Danish government was cooperating with Germany to avoid violence, many citizens became increasingly unhappy with German control. As German control over Denmark became stricter during World War II, many Danish citizens began resisting the Nazi occupation. At first, resistance was limited because the Danish government hoped cooperation would protect the country from violence and destruction. However, as the war continued and German demands increased, more people became angry with the occupation and wanted to fight back. Resistance groups began forming across Denmark, made up of students, workers, doctors, and ordinary citizens who secretly opposed Nazi rule. One major activity of the resistance movement was spreading illegal underground newspapers. These newspapers gave people information about the war that German-controlled newspapers refused to publish. Resistance members also encouraged citizens not to cooperate with the Nazis. Along with spreading information, resistance fighters carried out acts of sabotage against German military operations. They damaged railways, factories, and communication lines that were being used to support the German war effort. These actions slowed German transportation and showed that many Danes refused to fully accept Nazi control. By 1943, resistance in Denmark had grown much stronger. Strikes and protests broke out in several cities, and many citizens openly showed their opposition to Germany. In response, the Germans declared martial law and took tighter control over the country. Even though resistance fighters faced arrests, imprisonment, and execution, many continued risking their lives to oppose the occupation until Denmark was finally liberated in 1945. One of the most important events during the occupation of Denmark was the rescue of Danish Jews in 1943. After years of occupation, the Nazis decided they wanted to arrest and deport Jewish citizens living in Denmark. News of the planned arrests spread quickly, and many Danish citizens immediately began helping Jewish families escape before the Germans could capture them. People across Denmark worked together to protect their Jewish neighbors. Families hid Jewish citizens in homes, churches, hospitals, and other secret locations while plans were made for escape. Danish fishermen played an especially important role by secretly transporting Jewish families across the sea to neutral Sweden in small fishing boats. The journey was dangerous because German soldiers patrolled the coastline, and anyone caught helping Jewish people could be arrested or killed. Because of these rescue efforts, around 95% of Danish Jews survived the Holocaust, making it one of the most successful rescue operations in Nazi-occupied Europe. The bravery shown by ordinary Danish citizens became famous around the world after the war. This event later inspired the book Number the Stars, which tells the story of a Danish family helping their Jewish friends escape to Sweden during the Nazi occupation. The rescue of the Danish Jews remains an important example of courage, resistance, and humanity during World War II. Because Greenland was isolated from Denmark, local Danish officials in Greenland had to govern the territory themselves during the war. Greenland became strategically important because its location in the North Atlantic was useful for ships, airplanes, and weather forecasting. The United States agreed to help defend Greenland in order to prevent Germany from taking control of the island. American forces built military bases, airfields, and defense stations across Greenland during the war. Greenland's cryolite mine became extremely important because cryolite was needed to produce aluminum for Allied military aircraft. German teams secretly created weather stations in Greenland to collect Arctic weather information for military operations. Allied patrols searched for and destroyed several German weather stations operating in remote parts of Greenland. Wartime construction and trade helped modernize Greenland by improving transportation, communication, and infrastructure. It was given back to Denmark at the end of World War II. No matter how much the United States wanted Greenland, taking territory was not okay anymore. Now let's move on to Iceland. At the beginning of World War II, Iceland was a self-governing country connected to Denmark through a shared king. The United Kingdom feared Germany might use Iceland as a naval and air base in the North Atlantic. British forces invaded and occupied Iceland in May 1940 to prevent German control of the island. The invasion was very peaceful with basically no one dying, except one British officer, and it wasn't from combat, it was by his own means. Iceland's government protested the British occupation because Iceland had declared itself neutral in the war. British troops built roads, harbors, airfields, and military defenses throughout Iceland during the occupation. In 1941, the United States took over Iceland's defense even before officially entering the war. American soldiers remained stationed in Iceland for the rest of World War II because of the island's strategic location. Iceland became an important base for protecting Allied shipping routes across the Atlantic Ocean. In 1944, Iceland voted to end its union with Denmark and officially became an independent republic. After the war ended in 1945, Iceland remained fully independent and continued to play an important role in North Atlantic defense. Finally, the Faroe Islands. The British government made a deal with Denmark 3 days after the invasion to occupy the island. The British used this as an important naval and military position in the North Atlantic Ocean. The British built military faculties, improved harbors and expanded infrastructure on the island. They were returned after the war to Denmark. Denmark would be liberated on May 5, 1945. When British forces and Danish resistance took control of the country. Crowds across Denmark celebrated liberation by removing blacked-out curtains, displaying Danish flags and honoring resistance fighters.